coming up on Omnivore. Highlights from this year's IFT FIRST annual event and expo, and diving into a new water-based plant protein. This is Omnivore, from the editors of Food Technology Magazine and the Institute of Food Technologists.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by IFT Membership. To the innovators, the connectors, the changemakers, the future leaders, IFT is your professional home, a global community shaping the future of food. Explore the benefits of membership at ift.org/join.
Welcome to Omnivore from IFT and Food Technology, where we explore the intersection of business, science, and technology in the global food system. I'm Bill McDowell. Each summer, the IFT FIRST annual event and expo brings together thousands of scientific innovators from across the food sector. And this year's event revealed some striking shifts in what's next for the science of food. From the rising influence of artificial intelligence to new urgency around global trade and supply chains, the conversations on site were both wide-ranging and deeply interconnected. In this special segment, I sat down with food technology editors Mary Ellen Kuhn, Kelly Hensel, and Julie Larson-Brischer to unpack the trends and insights that stood out, what's driving them, and what they might mean for the future of food. Okay, nice to have an opportunity for us all to be together in one room. We're a couple months past FIRST now, so we can look back and reflect a little bit. Julie, you spent a fair amount of time on the expo floor. What were some of the trends that you saw, and were any of them surprising to you?
Yeah, we had several different editors and reporters out on the trade show floor this year. There was so much activity going on. It was almost hard to distill what were the trends, that we were really seeing. There was a lot of familiar trends. Like one of them was about health being a holistic endeavor. It's innovation is evolving to match what consumers are demanding, right? So we want to feel better. We want to sleep better. We want to think better, right? So there was a lot of new ingredients on the floor, very natural ingredients, botanicals. We're used to seeing those. But in some cases, people were really they were improving existing functional ingredients. There was one company, Lane Natural Ingredients, was showcasing this second generation beta-glucan ingredient because it has like this unique helical structure that enables better communication with the immune cells in the body. So it gives you a boost of immunity. So this is the kind of thing that consumers are looking for. So we saw that. We also saw what we called reformulation, risk, and resilience are now intertwined. It's not that these things weren't intertwined before, but it's almost like a tapestry. You get a tighter, more beautiful tapestry when the threads are really aligned and intertwined together. The lot of natural color solutions, again, rising to the top of interest on the trade show floor. You had California Natural Color. They were doing a proprietary crystal delivery format that was really unique, giving those, it was basically sort of vegetable-based colors, a showcase. And Oterra showcased a full range of natural colors that were from these decades-long breeding programs that they have put in place over pretty much every country in the world, or on every continent at least. And so now that's kind of paying off as people are questioning synthetic colors, right? So now they have a source of blue that's, almost, it's been there now for a hot minute. Also, I think the other thing, of course, there's a lot of GLP-1 talk on the floor. And I really think the other thing that, at least it wasn't completely surprising, but it was more prominent this year, was about data science being used in product formulation. We said that it was quietly reshaping R&D as AI transforms discovery. So And as a lot of people know, IFT itself rolled out our proprietary AI platform, co-developer this year, and there was a lot of buzz on the floor about that. So we're really, I think it wasn't so much that it was so surprising, but it really tied in, I think, with a lot of our sessions and stuff. What we were covering as trends, we were definitely seeing on the trade show floor.
Julie, you mentioned before about natural colors, and I think that signals, there was no shortage of timely discussion that was happening in and around the floor at the show. Food Technology hosted a few sessions at the Hot Topic studio. We had standing room only for some discussions regarding MAHA and misinformation and science denial. What were some of the trends that we gleaned from those? Kelly, what were some of your observations?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to moderate the standing room only session, hot topic session on MAHA. And funny enough that we're having this discussion today because the strategy document just came out. I haven't had a chance to read through all of it, but definitely some of the topics that my panelists discussed were top of mind all over the show floor, like Julie mentioned. So, obviously petroleum-based dyes, getting rid of those. It's popping up a lot in state legislature, but also now federal. So, Martin Hahn, who was one of my panelists from a partner at Hogan Lovells, was talking that we have to keep an eye on. It's much more necessary now to keep an eye on everything that's going on regulatory wise. Like every day it could be something different. So you've got to be prepared and you have to formulate to that. There's no choice. So even if it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, or it's not necessarily in the best interest of consumer public health, these things are happening and they are shaping formulation. So that was one of the main topics that I took away from that session in particular. So Mikkel Bakker, who was one of our keynote speakers on the very first morning of the show, talked about how we need to step up as an industry, as food scientists. Our old ways of operating aren't going to fit what the needs are, what consumers are desiring. So the food system needs to, offer products that are more than traditionally prioritizing elements of convenience, affordability, taste. He was calling for, expanded emphasis on personal, public, and planetary health. So really it's about not just making products that obviously taste good and that people want to eat, but making products that are good for us, which consumers are wanting, right? Like you said, Julie. So it's about formulating to consumers' desires and keeping an eye on that regulatory landscape.
So Mary Ellen, you presided over another pretty popular session on science denial and misinformation. Tell us about that.
It was great. It was such an animated discussion, not only with the two presenters, Charlie Arnott, who's the founder of the Center for Food Integrity, and a food science graduate student at McGill, Veronica Jaramillo. They were passionate about the topic. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was a point that Charlie made, that it's not just about better facts. It's about better communication, more effective communication. So consumers have questions about processed foods, about big food companies, and it's important to give them some answers that are based in science. But how do we do that? Well, Charlie made a really strong case for how to communicate. And it really starts with listening, asking questions, listening some more before you get into giving the message. And Charlie put it like this: communicate, pause. Correcting people doesn't work, but connecting does. Or put it another way, you can't just talk louder, or you can talk louder, but it's not going to work if you do that. So we're just in this world where misinformation is such a big problem, because with online and social media, there are all these algorithms that are reinforcing our own confirmation bias. So people are getting the message about the things they already believe. It's really hard to change viewpoints. But Veronica had a really good point that I thought made a lot of sense. And that was, it's not just about facts. It's about storytelling. That's what will resonate with consumers. She brought up the idea of golden rice. which is the fortified rice that has really prevented millions of children from suffering from malnutrition and blindness. So that is food science in action. And that was also really echoed by our IFT's top award winner, Dr. Levante Diashadi. And he, to me, was so inspirational because he epitomizes all that's good about food science. Dr. Diashadi dealt with fortifying salt, and he too impacted millions of lives in a positive way. So those were some of the positive messages that really resonated with me.
Beyond just reacting to all of the news and the disruption that's happening in the food system, one of the reasons why so many people look forward to coming to First is to be able to see and smell and taste innovation that's happening. Mary Ellen, you spent a fair amount of time over in the Startup Pavilion, which is usually where a lot of the exciting new stuff is happening. Talk a little bit about what you saw over there and what you gleaned from it.
Sure. The Startup Pavilion is really one of my favorite experiences at IFT First because it's where you see the companies that are really at the cutting edge of innovation. There are about 100 startups there, and I'm going to start with the one that actually came out on top in the pitch competition for startups, and that is a company called Plantible Foods. And Plantible Foods is about 7 years old. It was started by two Dutch entrepreneurs who have since moved to the United States. And they're tapping into a protein called ruby protein, and it's derived from this aquatic plant called Lemna. It's otherwise known as duckweed. And I talked to one of the co-founders, Tony Martens, and he says that people have known about Lemna as a protein source before, but no one's been as successful in commercializing it. And they've got this aquatic farm or aqua farm in Texas where they are growing the Lemna, and then they're milling it there and selling it. They're already selling it. And it's such a sustainable protein. It takes so much less water than animal protein or even something like soy protein. And it's got a lot of applications like bakery products, confections, sauces, and snacks. So I would say that sustainability was a big theme among the startups that I talked to at the Startup Pavilion. Another one is a Swedish company called Melton Marble, and they use precision fermentation to create vegan designer fats that really mimic the taste of animal fat. I was really just blown away by the taste of the fats. They could mimic like a meaty taste, so authentic, or it could be a creamy, buttery taste in a cupcake. And like the Plantible team, they've been working on this for a while. They've spent about 15 years, I think, developing this fat and lipid platform. But now they're pretty much ready to go. And another startup that I talked to with a sustainability story is one called Caribway. And they introduced a gut-friendly prebiotic fiber at first, and it comes from the carob plant, which is kind of an ancient crop, and they've reintroduced growing it in Israel. And it's a very sustainable crop. It doesn't take much water or irrigation to grow, and so it's perfect for a desert climate. And they were planning at the event, they were talking about harvesting their first big crop this past August. And the founder, Udi Alroy, is really seeing possible ways for this to move into other climates, like in the Southwest U.S., for example.
It's always a lot of fun to watch how these companies sort of grow and progress. Thanks to all of you for sharing your recaps. Mary Ellen Kuhn is the executive editor of Food Technology Magazine and director of content and creative services at IFT. Kelly Hensel is deputy managing editor, and Julie Larson-Brisher is our science and technology editor. You can read more about observations and highlights from this year's IFT First event in Chicago in the September issue of Food Technology. We'll be back with more Omnivore in a moment, but first, this word from our sponsor.
To the curious, to the bold, to the ones shaping the future of food, IFT is where you belong. As a member, You'll enjoy a global community united by purpose, driven by science, and ready to make a lasting impact on our food system. Connect with peers, thought leaders, and trusted experts. Stay on top of cutting-edge research and take your innovations and career further. You belong here. Become a member today at ift.org/join.
Welcome back to Omnivore. I'm Bill McDowell. If you've never heard of Ruby protein, a complete protein derived from the aquatic plant Lemna, you're not alone. But Tony Martens, co-founder of a company called Plantible Foods, is working to change that. This summer, Plantible got a helpful boost when it clinched first place in the pitch startup competition at IFT FIRST's annual event and expo in Chicago. In a conversation with Food Technology's Ellen Kuhn, Martin shares Plantible's origin story and why he's convinced that Ruby protein is much more than just an alternative protein source for food formulators.
Well, hi, Tony. Welcome to the Omnivore podcast.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for having me.
So I guess my first question is, what do you think it is about Plantible Foods that prompted the judges to choose the company as the winner in the pitch competition this summer at IFT FIRST?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, but I think there were a lot of very interesting startups with a lot of good ideas. I think what we might have been able to convey in a unique way is not only like the amazing product that we're producing or the cool new technology that we're developing, but also the social economic impact that we're making by deploying our technology in rural parts of the United States, where we're trying to bring along rural communities to become part of the solution instead of having to fear of the transition.
Oh, great. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about that. But first, let's learn more about this protein-rich ingredient called ruby protein or rubisco, and it comes from this aquatic plant called Lemna. So if this plant is such a rich source of protein, I'm wondering why we haven't heard more about it before.
It's a good question, Mary. And I think, quite frankly, I think that has to do with the fact that fundamentally there has been no disruption in our food system over the past 3,000 years, right? If you look at the crops that we're growing today, the animals that we're growing today, those were all chosen and commercialized over 3,000 years ago. And since then, instead of looking for what's better, what's more sustainable, what's healthier for the consumer, we just kept on mechanizing and optimizing the things that we already have. And thereby, despite the ever-growing and development of technology, forgot to think about how can we use today's technology to unlock novel, more sustainable, more nutrient-dense plants in favor of people and planet. And I think at Plantable, we've just realized in order to make a fundamental disruption in our food system that could hopefully create a more resilient and equitable agri-food supply chain, we have to start at the source, identifying better plants that can produce better ingredients. And that's, why we started with Lemna, or duckweed, as some might call it. Yeah.
Well, so really this is in many ways a biodiversity story, which is great.
Exactly. Amongst other things, yeah.
Well, take us back a little bit to how it all came to be.
We have to go all the way back to 2017, where me and my co-founder Moritz, we've been friends for 17 years, and we always contemplated starting a business together. We started to think about, hey, why are people using the ingredients that we use today? Why are people using these carbon or environmental intense proteins like dairy, egg, and meat proteins? Or why are we using these synthetic emulsifiers that are now, slowly but surely showing that they're actually not great for the human bodies to begin with? And we broke that down into, let's say, 3 critical categories. Like, obviously, the first one, it needs to taste great, right? So color, taste, smell, very critical that you make something that's appealing to the consumer. But secondly and thirdly, I think the critical drivers are functionality. So can it foam? Can it gel? Can it emulsify? Can you texturize products in such a way that it's delicious to eat? And then third, does it offer the nutrition that the human body needs? And so when we broke it down in those 3 categories, by working with various professors in the Netherlands, we rapidly came to know about an enzyme known as rubisco, which funnily enough is one of the most abundant enzymes or proteins in the world because it's in every leafy green. And what makes rubisco so unique is that if you're able to isolate it in its native form, you have a neutral tasting, neutral colored protein ingredient that is actually more functional than egg and dairy proteins. And it's also more nutritional than egg and dairy proteins when it comes to bioavailability and amino acid composition. And so we were like, fantastic. So why hasn't anybody thought about commercializing this protein? Now, it so happens to be that we were not the first ones to discover rubisco and its amazing functional properties. It's been considered the holy grail of proteins for the past 70 to 80 years. But what we have learned is that throughout those 70 and 80 years, a lot of companies tried to actually unlock rubisco at scale. And generally, the till went well when they started in the lab. It went well when they started in pilot. And then as soon as they went to commercial scale, they suddenly started to see a lot of issues. Now, following multiple interviews and conversations, we broke it down into a couple of simple things, which is like the first one is, since rubisco is a photosynthetic enzyme, as soon as you harvest a plant and the plant doesn't photosynthesize anymore, rubisco starts to slowly degrade. So rubisco has a half-time of about 4 hours, which means that when you're in the lab and the pilot scale, your supply chains are short, so it doesn't become an issue. But once you go to commercial scale and those supply chains elongate, you really have to, think about the fact, like, how do I maintain the integrity of the plant before I start to extract the rubisco from the feedstock material? Secondly, a lot of the crops that contain rubisco have a certain harvest cycle. Maybe they get harvested 2 times, 3 times, 4 times a year. But what that means is that in between those harvest cycles, your facility sits idle, but you design your facility for peak capacity during those harvest systems. So the unit economics never really made sense at that scale using the existing sources of rubisco like alfalfa or agricultural waste streams like carrot leaves, sugar beet leaves. Never made sense. And then thirdly, this is what we learned as well, is that generally with a lot of these field crops, people apply insecticides, pesticides that tend to concentrate inside of the leaf. And therefore, as you extract the compounds from this leaf matter, you're also starting to extract and concentrate some of these toxins that could actually jeopardize the safety of the ingredient that's there. So with all of that in mind, we're like, oh my God, okay, we have to think outside of the box. What are we going to do? Which then brought us into the world of novel plants and directed us towards this plant called Lemna, or like you said, commonly known as duckweed. This tiny leaf floats on the surface of water, doubles in mass every 48 hours, can be grown throughout the year and harvested every day of the week. It has about 45% protein, which is twice the level of most other commercially grown leafy greens. You don't use insecticides, don't use pesticides. And the beauty of it is that when you harvest it, it actually is still intact. So it's still photosynthesizing. So that means that as soon as it enters your processing facility, you still have the maximum amount of rubisco possible inside of your leaf matter, and therefore can maximize the quality and yield in your downstream processing facility. So that's what we theorized when we started. And, 7 years later, we have our first commercial facility up and running. And so far, so good, I should say.
It's really fascinating. So it seems from what you just described that it really is important to have the processing facility right there where you're growing it.
Yeah, as close as possible to really maximize the quality of the biomass going into your downstream process, because in the end, that dictates the quality of the product coming out.
Talk to us a little bit more about the qualities of rubisco protein.
If you think about, let's say, eggs or dairy proteins, rubisco tends to be more functional. So if you think about like, hey, I'm using 50 grams of egg powder, with rubisco, you can get away with like 20 or 25 grams of egg powder. So 50% or more reduction in the amount of functional ingredients that you use. And so what that allows food companies to do is actually, besides, let's say, having a more resilient supply chain and reducing their environmental footprint, it actually allows them to optimize their cost in use and create tastier, better for you products that are also actually more economically appealing to consumers and these food companies.
And how about the applications? What kind of products does it work for?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, like we're still learning as we're flying. Obviously, the background of knowledge as to like how Rubisco can be applied is very limited. I think we're seeing a huge demand right now coming from the baking and confectionery industries, where people are reducing their reliance on eggs, given the supply chain volatility over the past 5 years. So I think that's really driving our commercial demand forward.
Have companies commercialized products
Yeah,
with
yeah.
this protein?
Yeah, super exciting. So yeah, I mean, like we have multiple commercial arrangement in place with some of the largest food companies in the industry. So that's super cool. And I think we're now at this point where, I think we need to scale. Like, I mean, for the first time in our history over the past year, we've actually been shipping out commercial quantities from our facility in West Texas.
Let's go back to another thing that's important and that you alluded to, and that's the impact of your business on the local community in Texas.
Appreciate it. Yeah. I think let's take ourselves back to like 2022 when we decided to start to build out our first commercial facility, given the demand that's out there in the market. And I think back then we started to look for a place where we wanted to build this facility. So we looked at various states, landed in Texas for a variety of reasons. I think bureaucracy is relatively limited if you want to build something. Climate is about right for the plant that we're trying to grow, and there's also sufficient land or to expand. And we on the other hand, I'm Dutch. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and so when you talk about Texas in the Netherlands, there's a certain perception of Texas. And if you read some of the news regarding sustainability or specifically plant-based foods, I wouldn't necessarily say that the image that Texas has is that of a net promoter of these type of foods. So we went there with a little bit of like curiosity with respect to like how are we going to be received. But to be honest, the reception and the amount of support that we've received from the Texas community, yeah, we never received anything close to that in Southern California. And that has been like eye-opening to me as like how this community received us and supported us not only in the construction and the commissioning, but also in the continuous optimization and expansion of our production processes. We now have 35 people working there, backgrounds maybe in oil and gas or animal agriculture that are now learning new forms of aquaculture or aqua farming and new forms of protein extraction, food safety, quality and assurance, things that they might have never otherwise been exposed to. And I think for me as a founder, that has become the most rewarding thing about what we're doing at Plantible.
Well, that is a great story. It really kind of takes you back to that whole disruption theme too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey. I always really enjoy talking to startups. There's so many great stories. So basically, what would you say has been the hardest part about getting Plantible off the ground and the most rewarding part?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's hard to choose the hardest part because there have been so many and there still are. But I would say, I think if I reflect, so my co-founder and I, we just jumped on a plane with a couple of PowerPoint slides to San Diego without a network, without knowing anybody, basically. And then we landed in San Diego, where we fortunately were able to take over a former greenhouse facility for free. And then we realized how expensive the United States is, and we're like, okay, we're looking at our savings. We're like, okay, like how are we going to get out of this? And I think back then what we did is, we built like this whole list of angel investors in the space that we then started to send emails to. Like you can imagine, two Dutch guys, deserted farm in San Diego growing duckweed might not be the most appealing pitch to people. And so the hit rate was pretty low. But eventually we did get a couple of interested investors who then introduced us to a venture fund in San Francisco called Unshackled, who, one of the partners came down, looked us in the eyes, looked at the deck. There was nothing more than like a Breaking Bad trailer on a deserted greenhouse facility, right? And Moritz and myself. And he's like, sure, okay, guys, I'll give you some money. And we were off to the races. But I think the uncertainty and the lack of connectivity back when we came in the United States was probably the most difficult thing to get through. And then I think secondly, the second thing that was super hard is in 2020 we raised our seed round, and like a week later, Governor Newsom announced the lockdown due to COVID. And what we decided on the spot was just to buy a couple of RVs and to convert our office trailer into like a bedroom. And we basically lived on our farm with our 5 employees for the next 9 months, to continue to develop our process, really bring our lives back to a bare minimum where, you slept on the ground on a mattress, had your microwave to eat food. And maybe this is too much information for a podcast, but using the garden hose as the main shower, I think it was a very raw period, but actually also at the same time super fulfilling and uniting as a team. And it really gave us the opportunity to accelerate our development, going from a lab to pilot process. So I think those two things come to mind. And I think still today, new challenges arise as you mature and you grow, and it's always an uphill fight, right? And it's never easy. So, but those two things are the first thing that come to mind. Yeah.
Well, I would say it's definitely not too much information. It's great to hear the origin story of Plantible, and congratulations for that perseverance. And thanks again for being with us today.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Tony Martens is the co-founder of Plantible Foods, a company that's working to build a sustainable food system by producing plant-based Rubisco protein at an aquatic growing facility in Texas. You can read more about Plantible's story in the September issue of Food Technology.
Thank you to this episode's sponsor, IFT Membership. To the scientists, students, collaborators, innovators, and leaders shaping the future of food, you belong here. IFT is your community for trusted knowledge, lifelong learning, and meaningful experiences and connections. Join us today at ift.org/join.
And that wraps up this episode of Omnivore. Thanks again to all our guests and my colleagues at Food Technology. Omnivore is produced and distributed by the Institute of Food Technologists. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about Food Technology Magazine or how to join the conversation by becoming an IFT member, visit ift.org/membership. For more in-depth discussion about innovation in the science of food, check out IFT's other podcast, Side Dish, on the News and Publications page of ift.org. If you have comments or suggestions for future shows, just send us an email. The address is editors@ift.org. For the entire team at Food Technology and IFT, I'm Bill McDowell. Thanks for listening, and join us again for our next episode.